There's something pretty deep in us of distrusting each other if we're different, if we look a little different or we have different behaviors. But the Buddhist teacher and the Buddhist teachings are utterly inclusive. If you're a human being, you're suffering because it's so incredibly hard to be a human being. We don't talk in the culture, we don't talk about that much because, once you get your money scene together and your relationship scene together and you have the right children and they behave, then everything's going to be okay. And it's not. So what do? We wake up. The Buddha, an ordinary human being, I love saying that. The Buddha was an ordinary human being, and he wasn't a Buddhist. And he didn't teach Buddhism. He taught the Dharma. He was a scientist. He thought, this is how it is. So test it out and see if it's true. See if it's true that you can become a lot happier in your life. A lot happier, a lot kinder, a lot more generous, even playful. So, I wish you could all sit here. It's so incredibly beautiful to look out at you. No, that's wrong. You're incredibly beautiful. Hello, Zoomers. Hello, Sherry. Sherry's coming to us from a little island in British Columbia. Oh, there's Jai from California. All right. We have one woman who tunes into my classes from southern Turkey in the middle of the night. All right. So what to do? I invite you to sit comfortably upright. There's a lot of superstition around posture in Buddhism. You have to sit the right way, otherwise you'll never get awakened. And that's just culture. The way to sit is the way that you actually will practice. So please notice that you're alive and you're sitting here. Your body is nothing but life. It tingles, it vibrates, there's pressure. Where do you notice aliveness the most? The hands are alive. The face is alive. The feet are alive. They say that it's probably difficult for fish to realize they're in water because they've always been in water. There's an old teaching story of a turtle that goes out on the land and comes back and is talking to the fish, and the fish say, you're out of your mind. Land? This is it. This what I already experience is what's true. We rarely acknowledge, or we don't notice, consciousness. Right? We can even do some interesting tricks, like, please become aware of the life in your right hand. Please become aware of the baby finger of your left hand. How do you do that? Please notice the pressure of the body against the chair. Please notice that your mind wanders. It thinks, it plans, it remembers, it rehashes conversations. And please notice that your body breathes. It breathes in and breathes out all by itself. And this very natural breathing, uncontrolled, can become your home base for the rest of your life. When you want a little peace, a little concentration, come home to this fundamental sign of life, breathing in and breathing out. There's a kind of dance that is revealed as we sit for a little while. There's, quote, success at being in contact with the breath. And then the mind goes off somewhere. And then something very mysterious happens. Awareness notices this wandering mind. How do you do that? You don't. It does itself. And then when you're awake again like that, you can choose to come home to breathing. This is a spiritual practice, a training. sounds. We could take offense at sounds. That sound is distracting me. Or we could simply acknowledge sounds, hearing. And so we settle back into this moment. What we are doing is radically different from what we do most of the time. There's nothing to achieve here. There's no product. There's no status. There's no competition. Instead, there's a willingness to be here with whatever happens. Awakening from the trance of everyday life, the trances of I, me, mine, the storytelling mode of mind. Awakening and coming home to the actual tactile experience of in-breathing and out-breathing. the very first time a person sits down to meditate, the truth of reality blazes at them, at us. In the last century, there was a very famous teacher in southern Thailand called Achan Buddhadasa. People came from all over the world to meet him. One of the things he said that I heard on a recording was the truth of impermanence blazes at us with the brilliance of a million suns. It's a miracle we don't see it. And a great deal, if not most of our suffering, comes from our inability to accept that everything's changing. And right here in this breath or in this wandering mind, this truth of what's called anicca, impermanence, not permanent, blazes forth. And we're invited to be present at the birth of the breath, the first moment when it becomes apparent that a breath is going to happen. And we can notice as the chest and abdomen rise, come to fullness, and then fall, and then disappear. Mindfulness of breathing is foundational. It provides us with a very simple structure for practice to wake up. Listening to the sound of these cars is equally powerful. Of course, we don't hear a car. We hear a sound, and then the mind creates a car from previous experience. It's also quite possible to observe the mind itself. Is this mind right now content, at ease? Or is it discontent, wanting something, or not wanting something? Is this mind restless and agitated? Or perhaps sleepy and dull? Are there emotions present? Anything and everything that occurs is worthy of acknowledgement. Hearing. You can observe if there's any criticism in the mind. You know, I should be better at this than I am. Why can't I control my mind? Any criticism is worthy of observation itself. Oh, there's the criticizing mind. there is a cultural artifact very predominant in the Western world called self-hatred. It hardly exists at all in some cultures. But we can notice that. I should be better. There's something wrong with me. Observing how this too arises and passes away. In the insight meditation, we cultivate mindfulness. We cultivate being awake. This is what the Buddhists mean when they say, I take refuge in the Buddha. And this awakeness reveals how everything's changing. And this leads in the direction of freedom. The Buddha said, the taste of this practice at the beginning is the taste of freedom. In the middle, it's the taste of freedom. At the end, it's the taste of freedom. There's another tuning, another practice in which we accept the existence of the relative self, this time-bound living process. And we cultivate love and compassion. Love meaning there's room for everything. And compassion meaning when love encounters suffering, it turns into compassion. And so we could do for a few moments a different practice. Profoundly simple. It can go along with the words, I love you, with your name at the end. For some people, this is impossible or very difficult, which means practice is needed. I love you with your name at the end. Think of some way that you're suffering in your life. Sickness, relationship, loss. I love you with your name at the end. No matter how much pain that you're in, I will remain here and present. I love you with your name at the end. You've been on this journey through a lifetime for quite a while. It had a beginning. There was a moment when you actually were born. You could easily imagine being there at your birth. Maybe be the first person to hold this baby. Maybe hold this baby against your bare chest. This baby of you. And what do you say? Maybe through your tears, what do you say? I love you, you're welcome. You're perfect. There have been really hard times in your life. You can very easily remember them and remember to be there. I love you. I'm here. And we sit in a room or in a Zoom room with about 100 other people. Every single one of these people is living through a very challenging lifetime. Everyone's been hurt. Everyone's had great loss. We could just as easily say something like, I love you, or I acknowledge your great suffering in this lifetime. And imagine maybe extending a golden or white light from your heart to the hearts of others on Zoom or in the room here. We escape our isolation and fear. Maybe there's a statement of blessing like, may you be happy or free from fear and danger, or may your deepest heart's longing come true. And now, please become aware of your buttocks in the chair or the floor, the cushion. Notice the life in your hands. Notice the life in what you think of as your face. Notice the life in the eyes. And notice the intention, which happens in mind, the plan to open your eyes. And then actualize that. Notice the effort required to open the eyes. Notice the miracle that happens, seeing. Seeing. And you might keep that thought rolling around in your heart. It's the blessing thought. And to the degree that it's comfortable for you, please be invited to look around the room, turn around, see yourself in other forms. If your eyes meet with someone's, don't hesitate to stay for a while. And you might feel self-conscious or other conscious, or that's okay. And I'm going to make a leap here and invite you for the 26th of October. I'm doing a one-day retreat, only in person, folks, Zoom folks. You could come up and visit. It's called Remembering Death. And there's a very simple way to do it here, which is when you see someone, remember, this person is going to die. And that might be shocking, but it's a very powerful practice. Because it's true. Everything this person loves everything they have achieved, every opinion, every amassing of wealth, every memory vanishes. I had a teacher in San Francisco 50 years ago. Her name was Reena Sirkar, Burmese. No, she was actually Bengali, but she had lived in Burma. And she would do something very similar to what I just did, small group. And then she would say, remembering this, how can we do anything but love each other? Right? One of the purposes for the Remembering Death Day is to help us get over the initial, ugh, right? I don't want to remember that. I want to invite you to come afterwards in for tea, coffee, and socializing. And while you're there, if you've never read the plaque on the wall, on the north wall, it's got lights on it. I invite you to read that. It's the story of Ron Nato, of the Nato family here in town, Nato Boulevard. Ron came to see me in order to die consciously. Two of the cancer docs had pointed them my way. And I met with him almost weekly for a year. And he lit up like a Dharma light bulb. He was an incredible philanthropist. He trained hundreds of doctors how to be a better doctor. And he went around to the med schools throughout the Northwest giving talks on mindfulness and love and compassion and what really matters. And he endowed a chair up at OHSU with $1 million. The primary purpose of that professor being there is to help doctors, to be sure that all the doctors who graduate from OHSU know how to tell a patient when they're dying. Because historically, many doctors have been quadriplegic in this. They run away because they don't know how, they feel like they're failing. But to know how and to be present. Oh. I'm in quite a lovely state today. I like it. Are you not hearing? We have hearing impaired devices at the back that are really fine. The best I could buy. Okay. I have I have a little advertising to do. So we have here the PIMC website, which is absolutely gorgeous. This, no, can you? Why don't you share it? Tell me when. You got it? So we're now, the people on Zoom can now see what's on the screen. Sunday night, this Sunday, every second Sunday, Candle Summers does a group called Sunday Insight and Metta, Insight and Loving Kindness. And this Sunday, September 15th, for the third time, there's a guest teacher, Venerable Aya Virnani, who I think lives in Europe, who's very eloquent and elegant around the practice of loving kindness. So you can go and see that or participate in that. Basics of mindfulness. Doug Pullen, my dear friend. Doug Pullen was 21 years old and went with my then wife and I to India for 5 months. It became known at Lewis and Clark College as the Great Drug Trip to India. Whew, it was wild. But he got turned on to the Dharma, and he's been my pal ever since. He's part of the forming of PIMC. And he's done, I don't know how many times he's done this class, but it's really good. And if you've never done it, learn some of the nuts and bolts about practice. Practice is so much more than just following the breath, right? I liken it actually to this. I used to be a downhill skier and really into down. In fact, in my 20s, I said, if I can't ski, I might as well die. I was a ski patrol in Switzerland for a year. Anyway, in order to ski, you need to have strong quads. So it behooves one to get to the gym during the fall, because then you can actually fly. And it's the same with mindfulness, that if you do the practices, then your whole life becomes the practice of mindfulness. And Doug is incredibly good at teaching that. Women's Restoration and Rejuvenation, starting 9/20. Candle does this. This is the 4th or 5th iteration. Women and those who identify as women are welcome. Once a month. This is the front page of the website. The Heart of Awakening, Doug, doing another series, September 21. Autumn Equinox. Oh, that's a retreat. Oh, it's a one-day retreat. Thank you. And Autumn Equinox, this is the 3rd or 4th time Candle has done this with Phyllis Moses. They have gongs and dance and quite a beautiful thing. And is that it? Oh, it's now your moment to awaken, November 4th to 12th. My dear friend Don McEachern and I are teaching a 8-day retreat in Nanaimo, British Columbia. And I would say about that, if you want to change your life, big time, come and do a retreat. Also, the month before this, in October, I am teaching a retreat at Breitenbush. Well, there it is. Jim, when are you doing your next Qigong? October 4, Jim will be here doing a day of poetry and Qigong and meditation. All right, can you take it back, please? Well, what happens now is I yield the microphone to Jim, and he will come and do. Jim's been doing this, what he's about to do, forever, 20 years, 25 years. And in order to take mindfulness out into your life, here I am reaching for the car door. Here I am putting the car in reverse. Here I am changing the baby's diaper. Here I am chopping carrots. This is what I'm doing now. And the way Jim teaches this is an incredible bridge. Oh, Don, okay. Is a bridge practice. Paul just reminded me, I have to be responsible. This is a brick and mortar building. It's always falling apart. It needs constant maintenance. And PIMC needs your financial support. Think of it as giving to yourself. No one owns this. This building is owned by the nonprofit. Our board of directors is responsible for keeping it going according to the rules and the laws and so on. But it really is your playhouse. And you can be as involved as you want. Do you have any announcements you want to make, Doug? Okay. And the gas company doesn't say, would you like to offer a donation for your gas this month? They say, you want to keep getting gas? Well, pay up. We don't do that. We say, here's an opportunity to practice letting go of things, letting go of money. And you can make a small contribution, which is just as important as a large contribution for you, because it's the practice of letting go. And you can feel good about it. You can put, this was my monk's bowl in Burma 45 years ago. At the back of the room, there's a wooden box for donations. And you can go online, which is, I always like to say this, online is the best, because then you can do a monthly contribution, be a member of the stewardship circle. And then you can rest assured that every month your donation will happen, even if you forget. All right. Thank you, Doug. Would you like to come up, Doug? This is Doug, our esteemed. Do you see the microphone? Oh, here it is. If it had been a snake, it would have bit me. There you go.
Good morning. Oh, they are beautiful.
Aren't they?
Truly, truly. You are the crown of creation. Thank you. So a grizzly bear walks into a bar and says, bartender says, well, what do you have, big fella? He says, I'd like a gin and tonic. He says, okay, coming right up, but why the big pause?
Oh my God.
Segue into another part of Donna is the volunteer work, like Paul, the greeter, Charlene that you had today, hospitality, which you'll come to, I hope, at noon through there, the library. And so that's all of us. And I need specifically on September 14th, 9 to 11, we're going to clean up the gardens, and the fruit is down there, and I want to pick up the fruit and pull out the weeds, yada, yada. You can check that we'll be on the website. You can show up, bring your own tools. If you got something that pulls weeds, bring your gardening gloves. We don't have those. We come and we just work for 2 hours and you go home. It's great. October 19th, we will have what we call Karma Yoga here. And that's fantastic. You will want to come to that. It is so much fun. And we clean inside and out. And that'll be announced again. Please come, everybody. How many people have been to Karma Yoga? And was it
free
thumbs
lunch.
up, thumbs down? It's all good thumbs ups. And Jim Butter's Pizza, the best gluten-free pizza in town is what I hear. And so, yes, anyone who wants to volunteer, come talk to me afterwards and I will find something for you to do. Thank you very much.
All right. And now my moment of shaming. If you're planning to leave now, I dare you to stay. I am not the Buddha, obviously, but a lot more people got enlightened when the Buddha was talking about the Dharma than when they were sitting on their cushion. Because the information about the Dharma is potent. So there you are. If you leave, have a lovely time. But I invite you to stay and come for tea after. Mr. Dalton, would you care to take the sacred microphone?
Thank you, Paul. Got a spot here that I'm assigned to for the next 10 minutes. So we get in touch with the feeling of our connection with the earth. And if we shift our weight a little bit to one side and a little bit to the other side, we notice that we can't move one muscle by itself. The entire body moves if we start swaying. Everything has to cooperate. Everything has to move together, not in the same way, but together. The same thing is happening when we're breathing. We think we're breathing through our noses or through our mouths, but we're really taking in dynamic energy to every cell in the body. Trillions of cells, I'm told. At least billions, I'm not sure. But at any rate, the whole body responds to the new energy of a breath. Take a breath, exhale and sink. Breathe in and breathe out. We can't move one muscle, one bone, one ligament without everything else working together. We can't take a breath in. We can't take a breath out without every cell in the body responding, joining in. This dynamic exchange of new energy and this dynamic release of stress and strain. Healing energy in, releasing what we don't need. And the earth is happy to take what we don't need because this dynamic breathing earth can make use of it. So let's breathe in a little deeper and a little longer release. In and out. And in and out. Reaching overhead. Painting a rainbow. How we think about things determines to some degree how we feel. How we feel determines how we think. So when we say we're painting a rainbow, the whole body is painting the rainbow. Sinking, crossing the wrists, separating clouds. The whole body is working to separate clouds. The whole body is breathing with the earth and releasing what we don't need. We've been holding still pretty well, sitting for 30 or 40 minutes. Now we're going to push and pull and kind of release any holding, any tightness in the spine. One palm is up, one palm is forward, and we push and pull and then switch. But in order to do this simple gesture, the spine gets a little massage after sitting still for so long. And the shoulders need to be massaged a little bit. And then getting in touch again with our connection with the earth. When we reach across, one foot engages with the earth while the other rests. And then we reach across, lifting the heel, and then resting that leg. And every time we cross the midline with our arms, we're building little bridges in the networks of the brain to unify and make it easy for the left and right part of the body to cooperate. Stretching a little bit over to the corner and gazing at the moon. Exhaling as we come back to the center, inhaling up and back. Participating in the rhythm of the moon and the sun and the galaxies. Participating in the movement of clouds across the sky. Now, this time we'll use the hands to represent a cloud drifting across the sky with a shadow moving across the earth. Again, the way we think about things, it's not just an extended arm and a positioned palm. It's participation in the rhythms of clouds moving across in the sunlight and shadows moving across in the sunlight together. The power of the light and the love of the sun bring the clouds and the shadow into harmony. And it's the same with us. The light of understanding and love creates healing and harmony. So let's reach out, gather the light and the love in the room, and bring it into the center of our hearts, knowing that everyone else is participating in the same healing ritual. It's easy and calm and bright and healing. Then if we bring our feet together and our hands together, the lower part of the body, you can feel the unity and the balance and the uprightness and strength of a living organism we call this body. And as Robert mentioned earlier, I do a Qigong and movement retreat once a quarter, and the one coming up in October, the first Saturday of October, is from 10 till 4. Come and bring a lunch and move and meditate and listen to poetry. I've got a whole pamphlet I pulled off the web of Hafiz on love, which is really fun to go through. So thank you for joining me today, and you're welcome to come on October 4th, I think, the first Saturday in October.
Some people still left. Can you imagine that, with after that laying on of the guilt and shame? Oh. Oh yeah. Oh, I forgot one thing on the website. It's still advertising that on the 14th of September, I think it was, that the teachers in training were going to offer a day-long retreat, and we decided not to do that. So that day is paused. I'm going to read you the last chapter of my book. Settle in, it'll take a while. Several years ago, my wife, Jennifer, took me to New Orleans to the Jazz Fest, which she'd been to for many years. She went to college there and loves New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And on the last morning, we got up about 4 o'clock. I had an early flight. And we went downtown in a taxi. And her friend, her dear friend, Heidi, who she's known since they were in preschool, Heidi stays in the big fancy hotel downtown. And so we took the taxi to the hotel. We got out. We had one of those momentary kisses, see you at home. And then I went off to the airport, changed planes in Kansas City. And between Kansas City and here were the Rockies. And I was looking out the window and I'm amazed, they're so gorgeous from 30,000 feet. And then I went to the restroom, and then on the way back from the restroom, this poem occurred. It needed a little tweaking, but almost nothing. It's called 33,000 Feet. People sleep, watch videos, play games on screens, and sip at wine. Flying west over snow-covered mountains, a chasm opened, or perhaps just revealed itself with a taxi goodbye kiss. That moment of looking away, it's always the same. Here, and then not here. Those moments that we actually have when we can touch, hear, see, and smell one another are all we really have. The stakes are high, aren't they? Either we connect and love one another now, or not at all. People sleep, watch videos, play games on screens, and sip at wine. Flying west over snow-covered mountains, a chasm opened, or perhaps just revealed itself with a taxi goodbye kiss. That moment of looking away, it's always the same. Here, and then not here. Those moments that we actually have when we can touch, hear, see, and smell one another are all we really have. The stakes are high, aren't they? Either we connect and love one another now, or not at all. Which brings to the fore an early mentor of mine, my first psychotherapist, Don Nickerson, who helped perform my wedding here. Don died last year at 94. And it was he who suggested that I start a private practice teaching meditation. Anyway, over the years, we traded poems. When we would visit each other, we would share a poem and like it or not like it and critique it. And in the last year or two, his dementia started picking up. And sometimes I would go and mostly he would sleep. Or he'd be there and then not there. And I went a few months before he died. And he said, "You got a poem?" I said, "Yeah." And I shared my poem and he said, "Nah, not bad." And then it looked like he fell asleep. And I thought, well, that's fine. I'm just here to be with him. But he wasn't asleep, I don't think, because after 4 or 5 minutes, he said, opened his eyes, here, closed his eyes, gone again. Opened his eyes, not here. And repeated it. Here, not here. I want to say just a little bit about the talk that I intended to give today. Can anybody remind me the name of the woman who owns the team on Ted Lasso? Rebecca. Rebecca, okay. Yeah. My gosh, that series gets better and better. Oh, there's only 2 more. But there's a scene, and if you haven't watched Ted Lasso, it's really worth the watching. There's a scene in it where she's been invited to a gathering of billionaires who are going to create a new super soccer league that's going to completely undercut all the soccer teams in the world, the modern world. And she's a little anxious going there. Also, her former husband, who's really behaved badly throughout the series. And She's anxious. She plays it really well. And then she goes, she gets all dressed up and she looks in the mirror and you see her reflected. And she looks again. And there's a 5-year-old dressed simply, but the same colors. And then she moves in the 5-year-old and she watches herself as a 5-year-old. And then she looks back again and she's her, her reflected image. And then she goes to the meeting and there's this really psychopathic guy who lays out his plan. And she looks around the room and she sees all these little boys. And then she gives an incredibly beautiful soliloquy about the beauty of soccer and why do you need any more money? She just really lays it on. It's very poetic and incredible. And then we leave, and then we come back, and there's been a food fight, and she's covered with tomato sauce, and the psychopathic guy who was trying to do this thing, he leaves really angry and pouting, but I was very touched by her seeing herself. And this is like a précis, coming attractions, because there's much more I want to say about it. But if you were to look around this room, I invite you to do it and look around the Zoom screen too. And let everyone become 5 years old. It's very similar in a way to the visualization we did earlier that this person is going to die. It's just the other end. But that everybody here and every person we meet has a very young part of them. No one makes it out of childhood unscathed. It can be less and it can be a lot more, but the self that we bring to the world has these ancient wounds and vulnerabilities. And as our practice deepens, we will run into those parts of ourselves. And sometimes, as we encounter them, mostly we avoid them, of course, spiritual bypassing. But as we run into them, we may wind up getting insights into our personalities and how we've lived our lives. I'm speaking very autobiographically here. That and as we do that, and if we're willing and able to open to these parts of ourselves with compassion, then we start seeing the children around us. And we can be much more forgiving for the people who act so unskillfully. I have a picture of Donald Trump when he was 9. I can't look at it without almost weeping. because the damage had been done way earlier than that. So this is just an invitation to, when your vulnerabilities come up in your meditation, take time. When you feel sad or angry or any way, just be with yourself as gently and kindly as you possibly can. Because in doing so, you're doing the most important work a human being can do. Which reminds me, there's a story I've told a couple of times recently. I'll give you the very short version. And this has to do a little bit with what to do with the news. My beloved teacher and great friend Ruth Dennison, who's a picture of her over there, and there's a great picture of her in the front entry. She was a beautiful young girl living in Prussia during the war. And at the end of the war, she escaped. She got over to the Allied side, and she went back to get her auntie out. And she was a victim of sexual violence more times than she could remember. She said, I got onto a locomotive and there was a man there, so of course that happened. It's just routine. She was captured by the Russians, and she managed to get herself to be the favorite of the commander of the base. And then she got away, and she came to America, and there's a book about her called Dancing in the Dharma. It's really worth a read. We have several copies, I think. We did, anyway. Anyway, that's the setup. She lived through the war on the ground. And there was that war a few years, decades ago now, the Falklands War. Remember when the Argentinians seized the islands that are a few miles off their coast, and the British who owned them freaked out and sent the Navy and they sent the Navy and they killed a lot of, they sank a ship with 1,000 men on it. And they got the islands back. But in the run up to that, the news was like the news is, right? The music. We have music in our news. I was in Germany 2 years ago. There's no music in their news. There's no music in the news, and there are national level fact checkers that check the news. Anyway, I was using it for distraction, I guess, because it was really top of mind. The fleet has crossed the equator, and what's going to happen? And I happened at that time to go see Ruth Dennison, and very soon after I got there, down in the desert near Palm Springs, I said, Ruth, what do you think about the war? And she said, what war? And I said, well, I explained a little bit. And then she said, oh, darling, I don't pay any attention to that. I'm just here in the desert helping people remove greed, hatred, and ignorance from themselves so they don't start wars. And that's what we're doing here. We're really working to become kinder, more gentle, more attentive. And something very interesting was brought to my attention recently, which is that I'm teaching that retreat at Bethlehem Center in Canada. And the third or fourth day of the retreat is election day. And so I'm going to have some fun with that and ask people, what do you want to do? Do you want to tune in that? You want to pull out your phone and tune in that night? Or do you want to see how it would be to not? I think it'd be fascinating. So I think what I'd like to do is to ask if you have anything, any question you'd like to ask. I just had a memory of Ram Dass. Most of you probably know Ram Dass, very famous teacher of our generation. And he was with 1,500 people, and he said, I'm gonna sit up here and pretend that I'm Ram Dass, and you can pretend that we're in your living room, and you have a Ram Dass, and you're going to pretend to ask questions, and I'm going to pretend to respond. I love that image. Kind of takes some of the weight out of it. So if you do have a question, the microphone awaits you. KB, would you do the running? The microphone works like this. There's a little skill to it. If I talk, it doesn't do anything. If I talk into the side of it, it does next to nothing. But watch as I turn it. It's like this. As I turn it, it starts to become very sensitive, and then it's really got sound. So the listening area for this microphone is here. So that's good. And you have to hold it pretty close. Those of you on Zoom could participate in this if you wish.
I've been doing some studying around death and dying.
Closer.
Can you hear me now? Death and dying, as my mom passed in January and unexpectedly, and just trying to wrap my brain around the idea or lack of idea around like reincarnation as inclusive to Buddhism, and also just trying to really understand if that is lack of coming to true self and being, for lack of language, kind of stuck here, or just like how that fits into Buddhist practice, this idea of like reincarnation or being in purgatory.
Were you Catholic as a child? I don't know if you're allowed to talk about purgatory if you weren't Catholic. And anyway, John the 23rd banished purgatory. I mean, what happened to all those people in purgatory? Are you asking? I missed the beginning because the acoustics here are terrible. Now I can hear. You're asking about the Buddhist view on reincarnation? Yeah. Wouldn't it be a trip if I said, well, it's like this. You die and then you go through the bardos, and then based on the karma of this lifetime and all the other lifetimes, you select another body and you're born and you get to go on living that karmic stream. And only when you get enlightened does that not happen. Because I know, right? I know, and not only do I know it, but I've read books about it, and I have I read about it on the internet. So I'll tell you the prevailing belief in the Theravadan teachings of the Buddha, which is that during a lifetime, one acts on the basis of previous conditioning, and one creates karmic acts. But something that isn't often taught is that there's personal karma, there's national karma, there's genetic karma, there's all these different forces that are conditioning the next moment. And then there's the belief that at the moment of death, something, not a soul, but something takes birth again in the next lifetime, and then you're off to the races again. And the Buddha said that a lot of times, that it's in the teachings. And I should write to Lee Brasington, a very well-trained, well-educated in the Pali Canon, which is the Buddhist texts, like the Buddhist Bible. He gave a talk and pointed out that there's several places in the Pali Canon where the Buddha is with his senior students, all fully awakened beings. And he says something like, this is taking liberties with it, but that of course, the Buddha was to Hinduism as Martin Luther was to Catholicism. There was a Reformation, and he had a different experience, and so he taught his path of liberation. But he said, the meaning I got from it was that this is what was believed in his time. And I can't buck every single misunderstanding. I mean, he did buck some serious misunderstandings. He let women form an order of nuns. His wife and his stepmother, the Buddha was not raised by his mother. She died in childbirth. And he was raised by his stepmother, who the king had married at the same time. He married the sisters. And I read a book years and years ago about how the Buddha losing his mother in childbirth was the wound that led to him seeking awakening, that he was deeply injured by that. So in this little collection of suttas, the Buddha said, this is the popular belief, and of course I teach this. However, there's no one here at the beginning, and there's no one here at the end. But it's a popular thing, and also it's a way of creating social conformity and people behaving well. It's like if you behave yourself and go to church on Easter and eat fish on Friday, then you'll stand a chance of going up when you die versus going down when you die. The Catholic and also Catholicism got really into deep water with the being able to buy indulgences. Right? You could do really bad things and then give the church money, and then you would be forgiven. So, okay so far? Some of you may have read the book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And how many of you have read that book? It's an interesting, strange format. It's a little tall book. Well, Sogyal Rinpoche, who wrote that, came on a book tour, and I went and met him. He was a very impressive fellow. And one of my friends who was a journalist met with him privately and interviewed him. And he asked him very pointedly, Sogyal, are these teachings, and it's very much a, you die and then you're in this bardo and then you're in that bardo and this and the Tibetans do a whole lot of soul transfer and he asked him, do you know this by direct experience or by tradition? He said, tradition. You read that book and it's like, you take two Duplo blocks, you can see funny. I take care of a 1-year-old, my granddaughter. She's at this stage. She loves to take Duplos. You know, they're the big Legos. And I'll put it together and she'll take it apart, or handing it back and forth. We did it more than 50 times the other day. Give it back to me. But why am I saying that? It's presented as though it's that straightforward. No. And these are my referencing my elders. I asked Achan Sumedho, who's kind of the granddaddy of the Theravadan Buddhist world. I asked him one night, I was cleaning the kitchen and he came in to make his morning coffee, and I said, what do you make about rebirth? And he said, I have no idea, Robert. I haven't died yet. So what do we do with that? What happens when I die? Am I going to be safe? Because it's scary. The root of almost all human anxiety is the fear of death, fear of loss, right? What if you went home today and your house was burned down, or your partner had died, or your child had? I mean, there's this terror that we all have that things could go south, and they do. So Ram Dass said a really very useful thing about the notion of karma. Karma vipaka. Karma is intentional action, and vipaka is the fruits of it. We use the teaching completely inaccurately. You know, someone gets a cancer diagnosis or something, and we say, "Oh, that's your karma." It's even the wrong word. The correct word would be, "That's vipaka." That's the results of of quote your actions, and that misunderstanding tortures people. That well-meaning people will hurt people by saying, well, why are you causing this to yourself? A most egregious example of that, I was teaching in Canada, and a young woman, she was 36, I think, and she had 3 husbands die. One of cancer, one in a truck accident, and the other one was a float plane, seaplane. And well-meaning people had said to her on several occasions, why do you keep choosing men who will die young? It's absurd. So we do like to know, though, why is this happening? So we make up stories. And the teaching from Ram Dass that I found so helpful was, okay, I'm in this circumstance. This is the reality of this moment. And I want some guidance in how to behave, because on the one hand, I want to get a good rebirth. Or on the other hand, I want to be in a good space this afternoon and tomorrow. And so he said, I've got this on my plate, and I decide, well, what would be skillful? What would I feel the best about? How could I cultivate love and compassion and connection? Well, I would act as wisely and lovingly as I can, and then I would have the fruits of that. And then he said, it's no different at the end of a lifetime, or it makes no difference in the moment of action, whether it's next lifetime or 30 seconds from now. That still I would choose. Because I have this direction. It's like my shortest mission statement is, I want to be a Buddha when I grow up. And which is a shorthand way of saying I really want to be loving and compassionate and content and happy and not afraid. So we can use that about rebirth or rebirth into the next moment. Thank you. On a couple of occasions, not even on psychedelics, I've had experiences that one could easily say, whoa, That looks like a past life thing. But I don't know. Votes in favor of past lives. There are books of the stories of children in Burma and Sri Lanka. The Burmese one is, there's a couple of very interesting ones. A child who is like 4 years old keeps talking about this village, and he has a name. And they take him there or her there, and why this fence didn't used to be here, and this house is different, and what happened to that? They know all about this village. Now that's interesting. And I could believe that, but then it's still me believing. So I don't know. In Thailand and Burma and Sri Lanka, people are very generous. Generosity, well, I spent some time in Turkey, and the Turks are pretty damn generous too. And mostly around the world, people are generous, but it really is something in Thailand and Burma. And that's because there's a notion in Buddhism that if you're generous, you'll have a better next life. And so it's a very strong social movement thing to have generosity be elevated like that. But it also can turn into what's the word? Spiritual materialism. And an interesting piece of it is, and I don't know, maybe this is true, but they say the merit of the gift is greater the more awake the person is, the more worthy of gifts. And so what that means is that the monks get a lot of gifts. It's a way of supporting the monks. That's interesting. Not so much the nuns. Not so much the person on the street corner. I really enjoy stopping. Go ahead. I really enjoy stopping and talking to those people on the street corners and outside New Seasons. And it's so, it's such a simple way to be generous. Just to go into 7-Eleven and buy a hot dog and a few other good things, healthy things, and to give them to a person who's all strung out on something, and they can be warm that night. Now that's a good feeling. Please.
Recently, I've been thinking a lot about death, and I find I watch my mind trying to grapple with the concept of no longer existing.
Mm.
And I'm wondering if that's a healthy spiritual practice. It's so hard for me. I mean, I can't, that phrase, wrap your mind around, I can't wrap my mind around not existing. And yet I keep trying to do that. And I'm wondering if this is kind of barking up the wrong tree, so to speak, or it's a useful, I don't know, training, preparation, whether it's a healthy thing or an unhealthy thing. Thank you.
Do you exist now? How do you know? And the approach of this practice is develop a mind which is awake. And one thing you might notice, I predict you would notice, is that when you're undertaking that practice, you're thinking. And you could be aware of thinking and notice how it arises and passes away. Is there a self there? And so the inquiry, the opinion, I don't think the intellectual, I don't know if that's true. I I don't think an intellectual approach to thinking it through, and I don't think you'll ever get a resolution with that. However, examining, do I exist right now? What is it that exists right now? And that you can do very effectively. And the prediction I would make, which is central to this teaching, is every time you find a vestige of self, stay with it and it will dissolve. It's just all, because everything is always dissolving. And in that is freedom. That making any sense? Does that make any intuitive sense? Yeah. Because there isn't a future. There's only now. And so rather than what will happen when I die, am I dying right now? What is living right now? Just thought of something that my teacher, Matt Flickstein, would say in that moment. How did you word it? I can't remember exactly the way, but you are neither existing nor not existing. You simply are. Or life, we all want our lives to be meaningful. Life is neither meaningful nor meaningless. It just is this. But we want, I myself, I want to be. And, one day I feel very meaningful and important, and another day I feel like a lump of dog poop. And it's like, how do you put that together? Well, you can't. Right? Today's self-esteem reading -15. Today's I'm inflated. That was a great Dharma talk. Oh boy, self-esteem reading 45, and then We have time for one more, if there is. Pretty quiet on the Zoom front today.
More of a comment. I think that's one of the struggles in life, and I like the way you phrase that. The barometer on your self-esteem and acceptance. Yeah, that's. I just wanted to comment on it because, as you said last week, this is it. The moment now. Yeah, I'll probably get up in the morning, but I don't know that. Yeah, to me, that's my biggest struggle is self-esteem. Oh, I'm on top of the world. It's like, oh, today sucks. So,
right.
Yeah.
Could you riff off of that question on non-self?
You always ask the little questions. Do you remember that time when you were 5 or 25 or last week, when for a moment, or maybe a few moments, you disappeared? Maybe it was walking down a road, or maybe you were nursing the baby, or maybe you were driving the car. And it wasn't, it's like, yeah, what was that? Maybe you didn't even notice. I watched my children, my bio children, when they were little. Oh, I can watch for that with Junie. There was a certain point. They had really good hand mobility. They were playing with something and they had talking, but they were in the middle of doing something and they just stopped. And then they stopped for 30 seconds or so. And then they went right on. And I watched that happen and I thought, what's going on there? I'm going to run over a bit. In my youth, I traveled a lot, and I was in Australia. I was in Alice Springs, and I got a job on a cattle station, and Bond Springs. And the first day we were driving in the Land Rover, I had no idea what Land Rovers could do. And the boss turned and took us up this hill, and there was a fire, a brush fire, big fires in Australia. And I was assigned 12, I think, or 15 Aborigines who had never been to school, and they had grown up in the traditional way. And they mostly we were just waiting to see if the fire came our way. And they would sit under these little scrawny little bushes and just sit there with their eyes open. The flies were horrible. The eyes of flies would come and drink and so on. And they would sit there, and then if I started to move toward them from 50 yards or away, they just turn very quietly and look. And I did a little study of their pre-colonial practices, I guess, or way of being. And only later, when I was deeply engaged in meditation, did it occur to me, they were entering the never, never. They weren't there. There wasn't a person sitting there thinking. There was just presence, conscious, but no thinking. And we go to school. I mean, we worship at the temple of the rational mind for eons. And no one ever early on in school, now there's some in the schools but with mindfulness, but no one ever says, okay, now you're thinking. How about let's stop thinking? Let's allow thinking to subside and see what wisdom is there. So I said that the way I did, and do you remember? Because I bet it's happened for you, maybe hundreds of times, that you've just stopped thinking, you've stopped being someone, and you were in anatta, not self. Because I mean, I had an experience a few months ago. I was down at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, though the location doesn't matter at all. I was walking, and there was awareness. There's no thinking, there's just walking. And the right foot came up and did this. I wasn't meditating, I was just aware. This came up, and then the left foot came to about here, and then this whole world opened up, which was, oh gosh, I forgot to do that. And when I get home, I'll need to do this. And I wonder, oh, and this whole thing, this papancha, mental proliferation happened. And then by the time this foot hit the ground, it was gone. And there was like a looking back over my shoulder and realizing there's the whole of the spiritual teachings. The self is a trance state. The self is a whole bunch of stories. And that's where most of us live. Most people don't even know their mind wanders, let alone that they're lost in trance states. How could we possibly do what we do to each other in the war zones, if not just the war zones of our families. How could we possibly do that if we knew that we were hallucinating our ideology? Right? I'm going to be really bold here. In Israel, Palestine, the Israelis believe it's their land because God gave it to them. The Palestinians, Yahya Sinwar, I read a bit about him recently, now the leader of Hamas, he believes it's the same thing, only it's Arab land. And they train their children, and then their children kill each other. Sometimes one side has all the power and they massacre the other side. But the same thing's happening in Sudan and around the world. It's happening in various places because we're unconscious. We don't know that we've been brainwashed into an ideology that says, I'm a person. My side are persons, and our God blesses what we're doing. That's simply insane. And it's the same thing when I have had fights with my partners. I'm lost in my trance state, and we can do stunningly bad things. And this is human nature. I mean, it's not going to change. Though that's not true. It can change for you or you or you or you or you. We can become beacons of light. We can become really loving. What else is worth doing?